Good evening. My name is Jeff Stone, president of Project Help, Long Island. My co-host tonight is Kathy Levinson, vice president. Our mission of Project Help Long Island, health education and life programs, is to provide families with education and awareness on mental health and addiction. Tonight's discussion is on drastic cuts, lost lives, what you need to know and how you can help. Draconian cuts in human services for mental health, drugs and alcohol, and youth services will profoundly impact our communities. Bold action is necessary to save lives. Learn about this impending crisis and how your voice can be heard.
I'd like to introduce our panel. Well, before I introduce the panel, I'd like to add some thank yous. So thank you sincerely to the Port Washington Public Library for providing this Zoom meeting service for Project Help Long Island. We really do appreciate that. We welcome coalition partners, Dr. Joe Smith, Executive Director of Long Island Reach, the Port Counseling Center, Jennifer DeSana and Connie Bruno of Manhasset CASA, David Sills and Ellen Ritz of NAMI. And Project Help especially recognizes the generation of the Peter and Jerry DeJana Family Foundation, and also the support of the Kiwanis Club of Manhasset, Port Washington. Tonight we have an experienced and knowledgeable panel. I'd like to introduce who they are, starting with Dr. Joe Smith. Dr. Joe Smith is very well known throughout Nassau County. He is the Executive Director of Long Island Reach. Welcome.
I was telling you about.
Remember, if you're not speaking, you might want to mute because there is a little bit coming through.
Providers are having a meeting about the state cuts.
Okay. I'm going to continue. Shall I? I'll continue. Dr. Jeff Reynolds, we're glad that you're here tonight, sir. You are the president and CEO of the Family and Children's Association. Thank you for being here. Renee Richter. Renee is the ADA Director, Community Affairs, Nassau County District Attorney Chair, and Nassau County Heroin Prevention Task Force. Anthony Rizzuto, Director of Provider Relations for Seafield, and founder of FIST, which is Families in Support of Treatment. Arda Nazarian is the Strategic Communications Advisor to public and private companies and nonprofits and startups. She's a professor at Queens College and Columbia University, and we'll be speaking to Arda and learning a lot more about what she has been doing. So there we are. This is a great panel, and perhaps we can begin with Dr. Jeff Reynolds. And Dr. Reynolds, if you could you tell us about the Family and Children's Center, and tell us, Jeff was explaining to me that you had been up to Albany, and so let's start with what you've been up to. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, and a big thanks to all of the other panelists, and of course to you guys for hosting this. FCA has been around for more than 135 years. We provide 30 different programs across the lifespan to Nassau and Suffolk County residents. Everything from a pre-K in the village of Hempstead to 2 licensed chemical dependency treatment centers, 2 recovery centers, a whole suite of senior services. And all told, we serve about 30,000 people in any given year. And that number, of course, has gone up in the midst of COVID as we've struggled to meet the needs, particularly of those who have mental health disorders, substance use disorders, and seniors. One of the things that's been the most challenging for us is these are services that are chronically underfunded at a state level and at a county level. Private fundraising is off, as everybody else on the panel will tell you, because we can't hold our golf outings and we can't hold our dinners. And although you try to move those things virtually, they don't make as much money and you don't build the same spirit of camaraderie. But at the same time, New York State decided that it was going to withhold, which is the term they used, 20% of contracts for things like chemical dependency counseling services, for things like mental health services, and a lot of the youth programs. And while anybody on the street would look and say, well, you got 80% of your money, isn't that okay? The reality is that most of us are looking at caseload increases over the course of any given year on the rise. And COVID, of course, has exploded the demand for this types of services we provide. So this very same government, and I'm bipartisan in saying this, but the very same government that pledged their cooperation at the outset of COVID, then said, well, you know how we already don't give you enough money to cover everything you're doing and you have waiting lists? We're actually going to take 20% of that back because we expect the state and the counties to have a deficit. I will say that because of some very, very swift advocacy, and you mentioned the fact that a lot of us have been beating a path to Albany and contacting our legislators, and community groups have really rallied around this, we have managed to beat back the majority of those cuts. But I worry because I think the sense is, well, you beat back the cuts, you have a victory, what are you worried about? The reality is these services have been chronically underfunded for more than 3 decades. And we know that as we go into the next phase of COVID, more than half of people surveyed in federal surveys say they're suffering anxiety and depression they've never experienced before. We know that overdose fatalities in Nassau County are up 40%. We know that emergency room admissions for young people who have attempted suicides are up. By every measure, those issues are taking center stage. And guess what? We don't have a vaccine for those things. The only protection we have are the services provided by people like FCA and Long Island Reach and other organizations.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Joe, can you please jump in and tell us about Long Island Reach, what it's about? I think it's important for people to know what services you provide. And so if you would do that, sir.
Sure. First of all, thank you for putting this panel together, Jeff, Kathy, and the entire Project Help group. This is vitally important. We're here now at this moment in the midst of a triple pandemic. We have obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, which has ravaged our communities, ravaged our families. But this occurred in the midst of an opioid epidemic that's been with us for quite some time, and an overall drug and alcohol epidemic that we've been struggling with for decades. It's also in the midst of a mental health crisis with a paucity of resources that have been overburdened and overstrained for many, many years. And now in the midst of this pandemic, we see the growing need of young people, of older people, and everything in between. Every family in our neighborhoods, every family in our county, every family in our state are struggling under the effects of these triple pandemics. The demand for services, as Jeff said earlier, is growing. Ironically, when the state was talking about 20% cuts, we've seen an almost 20% increase in the number of telehealth visits that we've provided throughout the course of this pandemic. 20% more services than we provided in 2019. So the demand has already been felt, and we know from all the research that's been done post-disasters, whether we're talking about 9/11 or Oklahoma City or Katrina or Superstorm Sandy, the demand for social services, for mental health and chemical dependency treatment services, that demand increases following those disasters and lasts for years thereafter. And we've never experienced anything like what we're experiencing now. This pandemic, COVID-19, has impacted all of us profoundly. We've seen an increased number of young people struggling with the effects of schools in today, schools out tomorrow, remote learning. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, finish my education. I don't know what's happening. I can't see my friends. I can't socialize. And kids are suffering. Kids are depressed. Kids are anxious. Kids are struggling. And yet the state of New York, in the face of all of that, and there's much more that we could talk about, in the face of all of that, would dare to even think about reducing services, because that's what a 20% cut would translate to. It would translate to less services. It would translate to longer waiting lists. It would translate to lost lives. The fact of the matter is that we've seen an incredible rise already in the number of fatal drug overdoses, and we've seen an incredible rise in the number of suicide attempts. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
If we don't provide the kind of resources that we need now, in this moment, we are going to see more lives lost, more desperation, more sense of powerlessness and hopelessness and despair. And the tragedy of all of that is that it's preventable. You know, when we talk glibly about things like the war on drugs, right? That we're going to wage war against this silent enemy. We talk about that, we use that metaphor, and then we tie our hands behind our backs. When we go to war, we don't ask, how much is it going to cost to build those battleships? How much will it cost to arm our soldiers? How much will it cost to provide them with the kind of resources that they need to fight and to win the battle? We just do it. And we do it because when we've had to do it, we've had bold leadership. We've had people who've been willing to stand up as legislators and other elected officials, to stand up and say, we're going to do what's hard. We're going to do it because we have to do it. We'll figure it out. And that's what I suspect we need. That's not what I suspect. That's what I know we have to expect of our elected officials now. They have to take bold action. They have to say, we are going to do it. And we're going to make sure that all the resources that are needed are going to be there. So that when that family is hurting, when that kid is suffering, when that person who's thinking of maybe harming themselves knows that they need help and reaches out and takes the brave step of making that phone call to ask for help, that there'll be somebody there to answer the phone and to provide the services that they need. We demand that. We expect our elected officials to take those steps necessary and to make sure that those resources are available so that we can provide the services that translates to saved lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
If I may,
Joe, before I introduce Renee Fichter, I just want to make a comment. 2 weeks ago, Jeff and I and the board had an event with frontline workers and the toll that has been on them. And it was a great panel. We had the American Red Cross, we had the Salvation Army, we had Island Harvest, we had emergency services, and we had a critical care nurse. What was interesting is as we were putting the panel together, we were in search of somebody right there in the front line of healthcare, nursing. And we did have a great critical care nurse on the panel that night. But truth be told, she was retired. And so my point is that we've got thousands of frontline healthcare people out there who are part of this growing group of people who are in need of services. And what we saw for the panel was that they were reluctant to come on because they didn't want to speak about their hospital, but more so personally, they were traumatized and they felt that they were exhausted and that they could not speak about what the experience has been like for the past 12 months in going to work every day and dealing with COVID and the feelings and isolation and exhaustion that they're having. And so there's that group in addition to everybody else that will be needing all of your services. I'd like to move on
Oh,
to
just look down
Renee. To Renee and Renee.
Kathy, if I may.
Yes, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add something. Dr. Joe, you recently had a press conference over at
Yes.
Fort Counseling, Main
Yes.
Street, Fort Washington. And it was quite the event. And you provide through longislandreach.org sample letters you could send to your elected representatives.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
that's very important. Everybody's got to get in on this. And it was well represented, including Sharon Richmond, who had lost her son a couple of years back to an overdose. And trying to find treatment for him prior to that was next to impossible.
Okay.
So the need is great, that's for sure. And Jeff, I just want to say, I saw the legislative budget hearing on mental hygiene. You took it to the mat. I mean, it was really, really fine presentation. And this is where everybody's got to get something going here. You know, we all have a little part to play, whether it's little or small or big or what have you. So
Absolutely.
anyway.
So Renee Fichter, Heroin Task Force. Renee, would you explain what it is that you're involved with and what is it you do for Nassau County?
All right, I'm happy to. First of all, I wanted to
Thank you.
thank you, Kathy and Jeff, for putting this together. Also, I see a whole group of fellow warriors that we've known each other a long time, so it's a great a gang of folks. And I also wanted to share that 50 years ago, I started in Port Washington as just a brand new lawyer who had no idea what these crazy drug and alcohol people were doing. I found myself there. I was only supposed to work for about 3 or 4 weeks, help out an agency close its doors called the AC. It was going out of business. And there was a guy up there at a place called Port Alert, which is now Long Island Reach, and a crazy guy from the Joint Coalition known as Joseph Smith, and was there. We haven't changed a bit, actually. And instead of only staying there for 3 weeks, I fell in love with this crazy group of people, decided to not do law, and instead spent 23 years building coalitions and working on your end, fighting for grants. And it's been a marvelous love affair. But for the next, and then of course, the fabulous library, which is here. Port doesn't have there's no better library than the Port Washington library system. And you guys have gone right into the 21st century, running these Zoom platforms for free. It's really an incredible time. So I spent the first 20 years trying to figure out how to connect all your services to the criminal justice system, prison reform, bail reform. We had our bail program at the time. And then I went over to the other side, and I worked with 3 different DAs, both Republican and Democrat, to try to reconnect it from the inside. And we spent a lot of time, and we learned a couple of things that were really important. Number one, early intervention is critical. The sooner you can get to the point, from the point of crisis, the more chance you have of succeeding getting somebody into treatment. Number two, there has to be some kind of monitoring of the placement, and there has to be a sense of consequence that if I'm in trouble, I could really, something bad would happen. But if I go into treatment, maybe there's a carrot for me as well as a stick. And it took a long time, but today the criminal justice system fully does get it. There are intervention projects. Congratulations to LICAD and some of the work they were doing with there. There are diversion programs. We set up TASC, Treatment Alternate Street Crime, was its national council for 20 years. And things are going really well, but I'm sad to report that things are not going really well now on a couple of things. Number one, if we spent so much time coordinating the criminal justice system with the treatment, we're gonna have a bridge to nowhere. If we don't have that vibrant network of treatment programs, there's no place to refer the people to. And that's a serious problem. Number two, lately, some of the criminal justice reform laws, which are very well intentioned for very important social justice issues, are having a negative effect on our ability to get people into treatment. Right now, the whole idea was to, a person has to have a sense of consequence. The climate right now is that there's very little consequence in criminal justice. The decriminalization, the commercialization movement is well intentioned, but the result is a sense of, well, it's not that bad. And what that means is when someone is brought in or not brought in at all, their option of going into treatment is reduced. I noticed when we started that the vast majority of people that were coming into the criminal justice system, as addicted as they were, had never been in treatment before. So it's a major point of intervention. Number two, in monitoring for 20 years, the treatment programs, we learned that folks preferred to have cases coming from the criminal justice system because there's a sense of accountability and monitoring. The problem is that the walk-ins walk out. Walk-ins go for a little while, and then after they're feeling better, may leave prematurely. Not always, but we're losing that. We're losing that whole thing with the bail reform movement and also the reduction in the penalties. And I don't know what the governor was talking about when he wanted to reduce the penalty for sale to minors. Seemed to me a pretty strange point of view. We're losing the ability to refer. I just checked with our intervention programs, our diversion programs, and their referrals are way, way down. And part of it is because we're diverting the people at the early stage, not diverting them to treatment, just back to the street, period. So we're having less and less cases coming from the criminal justice system. The last part is that we all believe in treatment and we all believe in prevention. We'd like to never see the crime happen in the first place. That's the whole idea. But what we are seeing at this point is you got to get the drugs off the street. How do you do that? Vast majority of criminal justice work in getting the drugs off the street starts at the lowest level. The small-time person who was just arrested for the first time, that's the person who'll get you up the food chain to the big guy. If you can't do that, our ability to go after the big guy is really severely hurt. So last thing I want to see is anybody going to jail. Last thing I want to see is somebody getting a record. But I also don't want to have an empty, hollow kind of a system that's just not going to be doing that. So our ability to make the arrests and to make our way up the food chain and get after the major suppliers is heavily compromised. Our ability to convince people they should be in treatment is heavily compromised. And our ability to send people to your programs, which are being diminished, is also compromised. How do we do that? I chair the Heroin Prevention Task Force. It was set up a long time ago by Tom Swazi and then later Mangano and now by Kern and the two DAs. The picture behind me is a typical meeting. The coalition's been in business about 14 years. We meet every month. We work on a lot of projects. Right now, we've gone online. We do a lot of seminars. And thanks to Jeff, who introduced us to a number of people, the seminars are packed at 500 people a pop, usually within 48 hours of setting up. So they're really good. So I appreciate the time to come on board. And I just love being with this gang of people. And I also wanted to thank Assemblyman Mike Durso, because I also know that the Assembly people, I think it was Keith Brown, just recently did a really good forum on marijuana, which we recorded. I was so happy to see that. I don't want to be a party pooper, but frankly, the large-scale commercialization of pot, this is my personal point of view, it is not the DA's necessarily point of view, is a real bad idea. And anything we can do to slow that down and be smart about it, I think would really help our kids. And that's my spiel, folks.
And you're sticking to it. Thank you, Renee. Thank you. Anthony, you're with Seafield and Fist. Could you please tell us about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks again, Jeff, Kathy, for putting this on and for the invite, and for anybody else that participated in putting it on. Thanks to all the speakers. I've heard some really good stuff tonight, and going to try not to be repetitive. There were some things that, people said that I had planned on talking about, but I'm glad that it was said, and it was said well. I'll just touch on highlight a couple of quick things. When Jeff talked about getting the 20% back, brings us back to the norm, where the norm was not sufficient to begin with, and then just throw on the other side of the equation that the increase for the demand goes up. So when you look at it from a supply and demand standpoint, we know that the demand is going up dramatically, and we know even if we get the 20% back, we were already at a shortfall. So that's a problem. The other day when we did this press conference, we kind of touched on a lot of these different things, and I was thinking about it as I was, going through the week, and a couple of things come to mind. We've talked about the overdoses going up, both fatal and non-fatal. One thing I didn't hear too much about is domestic violence having gone up. We know that there's been a big increase in domestic violence. The suicide attempts were talked about. Mental health, Jeff referred to the anxiety and depression that's through the roof. If you just sit down, and we're all human beings here, so we all have our professional life, and then we have our personal life, right? So if you look at it from a personal life, so here I'm a father, I'm a husband, so I have a wife and 2 kids, and I go out and I work in healthcare, right? And before vaccines and all of that stuff was coming around, right, I have to make sure that I'm there to meet the needs of the people, right? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about, you know what, I can't go see my dad who's 89. I can't go see my mom who's 83. I can't do that. So the personal toll that it takes on people. And then when you think about those people, right, who are trying to deal with life on life's terms, right, it becomes very overwhelming. Alcohol sounds like a good relief. A lot of people, you know, when everything was shutting down, liquor stores were open, right? You weren't able to go to church, you weren't able to go to synagogue, you weren't able to go to temple, but you can go to the liquor store. So a couple of things to think about, you know, that we haven't maybe talked about. There's a big number, there's a big increase in divorce right now. One of the things that I'm seeing, and I have a lot of nurses in the family, and I think it was Kathy that alluded to the idea of the trauma that they're experiencing. I can tell you that in my work, I've been working in the field of addiction. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Seafield. I've been with Seafield for 20 years. Seafield has been around for 35 years. We have an inpatient facility out in West Hampton Beach with 100 beds where we provide detox and rehab for people that struggle with addiction. We have 5 outpatient facilities located throughout Long Island where we do outpatient services. And then we have 13 recovery homes totaling about 190 beds for people who need an extra layer of living in a safe environment to support their recovery in their early stages of recovery. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're seeing. We're seeing people coming to us sicker and sicker. We're seeing people, the families that are devastated, and the families are going through their own thing, and that's something I'll touch on as well. The individuals, if you think about us losing 500,000 people, there's a lot of grief and loss out there. There's a lot of people that have lost somebody in their life. And we know in our field, we know that often drugs and alcohol in and of itself isn't the problem. It's some people's solution to the problem. And when you look at what's happening with trauma and you look at the financial insecurity and you look at how do I get to my job when I got to meet the needs of my kids because they can't go to school and I got to do the homeschooling, and it's just a really difficult time for people. In addition, the isolation, right? So you have the isolation where typically, right, we have a tough week. Maybe you go take a ride to the lake, or maybe you go see a comedy show, or maybe you go, people aren't able to get away. People are not able to get on a plane and go, you know, to a little vacation or whatever. So on one end, you know, the stress has gone up through the roof. On the other end, what we would typically use as stress relievers, right, have been taken away from us. I know a lot of people that are in recovery, and I was talking to a gentleman who had 10 years sober, and early on, this was in April, this whole thing like really hit a head in about March 12th, March 13th. And I said, hey, how you doing? He said, not good. He said, they closed my meetings, they closed my gym, and they closed my house of worship. He's like, those are 3 really big parts of me staying sober and maintaining my sobriety. So there's some real challenges in that area. I just want to go back to the original purpose of this whole thing about the cuts. Listen, the reality of it is this. We know that there's a financial pitfall. We know that the revenue hasn't been coming in, and we know that we're in a position. However, with that being said, we're going to pay. The question is, do we pay today or do we pay tomorrow? My experience tells me if we pay today and we can catch this earlier on, to kind of to what Renee was saying, maybe we have the ability to connect somebody in an outpatient and get them services in an outpatient. If you don't get people the help that they need early on, chronic and progressive illness, it continues to get worse. And what might have worked today will definitely not work tomorrow. And when you start looking at the cost of, so here's what untreated addiction and untreated mental health lead to: homelessness, lead to crime, incarceration, lead to hospitalizations. That's big money items. So the fact about paying, we're going to pay. The question is, do we do it now or do we do it then? What I didn't mention also is how many lives will be lost in that process of waiting to get the help that we need. Sharon said this, I think it was either Sharon or it was Therese from Long Island Crisis Center. You know, we have a history of being a reactive society. It would really benefit us if we could be a proactive society, right? They talk about $1 worth of prevention is $7 worth of treatment. I think there's stuff that needs to be done now rather than later. And the last point I'll say is about the marijuana. What the hell are they thinking? Really? Really? In a time right now where people are looking to find some kind of relief and some kind of comfort to how to deal with this insanity, you're going to make something like that legal that's that accessible. Why don't we just take a look at how it's worked in Colorado? Why don't we go take a look at how it's worked in the places where they did legalize it with all of this revenue that was going to come, right? What a joke. I mean, it's just very short-sighted, but I don't want to take away from the purpose of this meeting. But now that you opened up the can, Renee, I'm going to follow that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Very well said. You know, you were talking about, you know, we've lost 500,000 people and that we haven't been able to have our funerals or our memorials, and we haven't been able to grieve properly. And I personally can relate to that because I have lost my lifelong best friend this year, and we have yet to have a memorial, yet to be together to speak about her and celebrate her life. And that's not easy. It's very sad. Also, I want to add that today I was speaking to the wife of a police officer, a local police officer here in Fort Washington, and she said, you know, thank you for having this panel tonight because, you know, people are not paying attention the way that they need to, just like you said, Anthony and Joe and Jeff and Renee, that the rate of domestic violence, suicide, overdose, you know, the calls that the police and the emergency services are getting are just astonishing, and we've never seen them in the history of our country at these numbers. So thank you. With that, I want to have Arda Nazarian introduce herself. She wears a lot of hats. Dr. Joe speaks very well of you, Arda. And so can you tell us a bit about yourself?
So sure. And I have to say, I feel a little bit like a cleanup batter in a way, only because everything each of you said is what helps me to do my job. So I'll tell you about myself. I mean, I've been doing communications for 36 years. And I've worked, you know, I started my career working for the first Governor Cuomo, and I worked for him for 11 years, starting as an intern, working my way up to head of his New York press office. And then, you know, he lost, I ended up on Wall Street for a long time. So I learned all about that part of the world, the economy, everything else, business, but still doing communications. And during that time, unknowingly, I learned about issues of social impact, social responsibility, public-private partnerships, because I think that was ingrained in me. And then I went back into government, you know, working for Tom Suozzi starting in the early 2000s, and I worked for him as his head of policy. So I worked on these issues, and I worked on the task force, and I worked on, you know, issues of regional planning, no wrong door. I mean, all of these issues. So interestingly, I have the perspective of knowing how the state works, knowing how the private sector works, knowing how local government works. And then when Tom lost in 2009, I started my own practice in strategic communications, and I hate to be called a consultant. Anyone who knows me knows that. I consider myself an advisor, and I, knock on wood, have been able to sort of pick and choose who I do work with. So I still work for big companies, global companies, and I worked for years with the Hackadoring Foundation. So worked with a lot of nonprofits on Long Island, worked with Amy. And so, you know, so I've had all of these different hats, but through them all, and I say this, and by the way, when Tom lost in 2009, it also let me go back to teaching, which is my passion. And I feel like what I do with nonprofits, with, you know, for company, I feel like a teacher. because I think the concept of communication is often misunderstood. And yet it's so critical to achieving any of what we all need to achieve. So, I teach at the undergraduate level at Queens College, which is where I graduated from. I teach at the graduate level at Columbia. So what's brought me here, and I was reconnecting with Joe, was like, it was very positive, only because we worked so well together. I mean, I knew him going back to when I was in the state, then when I worked in the county and worked with the Hagedorn Foundation, but I was pulled in by the United Way because they started this effort a couple of months ago when the cuts became apparent, or the proposed cuts, I should say, to say we have 103 partner agencies. We want to get them all on the same page in terms of messaging, in terms of who they should reach, how they should reach, all of that. So the fundamentals of what I do are helping people figure out, who the target audiences are, what the messages are, what the right way to reach them is, and how do you mobilize? Because every single agency knows what they want to say. And I hear all of you speaking tonight, and I'm like, these stories, and they're not stories. I mean, these facts are powerful, but how do we get people, the state, the county, to understand that we're all working on this together? And Joe knows in the last few days when the proposed cuts may or may not happen, how do we pivot? What do we focus on now? And the point is, it shouldn't just be because of the crisis of the April 1st state budget deadline. Year round, people like you, nonprofits, people who do the work you do with passion, need to keep these legislators at whatever level educated. And I think Assemblyman Durso will say this. I mean, he doesn't just want to see people flailing 3 or 4 weeks before the budget's due. Being informed on what's going on in the communities, even pre-COVID, whose lives are being touched, what programs work, how many people do we help, how does that help happen? And and I used to volunteer with Jen DeSena at CASA, in Manhasset, and it was like people were clueless, and then suddenly something would happen and everyone would mobilize. That is not the most impactful way to communicate. So that's kind of the background on who I am and what I'm doing now. I think as far as this goes, the message is simple. When it was cuts, the cuts were wrong cuts, wrong time. Now that it may not be total cuts, it's absolutely true that our services are needed more. So not only don't think about cutting, think about investing more, because, and I listened to the metaphors, and when I spoke to Jeff Reynolds, when all this was starting with United Way a couple of months ago, I remember, and I've plagiarized you a lot, Jeff, so thank you. He said that what we do, what these health and human services agencies do, are the PPEs that people don't see. You would not go out without a mask. Why would you let the things happen without the proper protection? And so tonight, saying it like, fine, there's a vaccine. Thank God there's a vaccine. We are the vaccine to the next level of crisis. So putting it like that, going to war, right? Even using an expression like we are a reactive society. I hadn't heard it put that way. So I actually listened to people like you. I know plagiarize is a bad word, but as I tell my business writing students, there's no such thing as plagiarizing in business writing. If someone has a good idea, give them credit for it. Don't give a citation, just mention that they mentioned it. And I will say we are a reactive society, and reactive is so much more costly than proactive. Proactive means talking to your legislators regularly, not just during a time of crisis. Proactive is doing what Joe did, which is these materials, the communications, the email templates, the draft letters that we've written to letters to the editor, the draft emails to civic organizations. I mean, that I want to mention, this is not a health and human services issue. This is an issue about the sustainability of Long Island, because more homelessness, more crime, more domestic violence impacts the quality of life. So if your neighbors who are not, who are blessed not to be experiencing what all of us are experiencing, good for them. Let them understand that suddenly this is going to impact their real estate value. It's going to impact the quality of life in their communities. It's going to impact their kids' schools. And so connecting all those dots is what I try to do. So my degrees are in public policy and, you know, my experiences in government and the private sector, but really it's just the ability to connect those dots and communicate what needs to be communicated. But I don't work best alone. I work when I work with you, when I work with others like you, when I work with people who are listening to this, who want to play a role, because it is really easy to be complacent. It's really easy to assume that someone else is going to do the work. So what I've said, you know, we did probably 24 workshops with agencies about this issue, where I said, who's on your board? Who are your clients? Respecting confidentiality. You know, who is it that would be willing to reach out to legislators as well? Because it's not just the executive director of a nonprofit who should do it. It's the board members, it's the clients, it's the volunteers. Like Long Island Crisis Center is an excellent example. They have volunteers who are passionate about what they do. They should share the stories, again, respecting confidentiality, that will compel legislators to understand how critical the issue is. So that's really kind of who I am, where I come from, and what I do, and how I try to help in any way I can.
You know, as I was listening to you, Arda, I was thinking about last March and April and May, when we were, you know, pretty deep into all of this COVID, and things were locked down. Every night, people would step out onto balconies and they would bang pots and ring bells as a way of saying, we see you people in the front line, we acknowledge you, we know we're in a crisis, we know that we're in trouble, and we're grateful for you. And 2 weeks ago on the panel, somebody said, that's not happening anymore. Those pots aren't being, you know, banged anymore. So as I'm listening to you and to all of you, I'm wondering, you know, how do we ring this community bell that to get the attention of the community across Long Island, so that people really understand that this is for real. We all on this panel know what the stats are, and we talk about them very clearly, but how do we get the attention of people to know that they have to do something different and take a stand? I open that to anybody.
You know, I'd like to respond to that, Kathy, because it's a really, really important question. And certainly I think some of what we do tonight is part of that. You know, I think that we have to keep the message clear, focused, simple, and directed. And I think the more that we do that, the more we get that message across, and the more that we enlist people to join with us in the effort to make a difference. That's how we keep that true. That's how we have that ringing of the truth. You know, we can't let up. The fact of the matter is that those 20% withholds that we believe, we don't know for a fact, but we believe have been withdrawn, that didn't happen by magic. That happened because countless numbers of people have risen up and said, you can't do that. It's wrong. We can't let that happen. And we're going to keep that message going because, as Arda said, we now have to say, guess what? Talking about cuts was insanity. But the reality is that not stepping up now and taking bold action and putting more resources because the need is greater than ever, that's also insanity. And so we have to keep that message going loud and clear. Programs like this help to do that. And I would encourage everyone who's on this call, you can go to our website, www.longislandreach.org, and you can see what you can do. Right. The letters that you can write, contact information for your legislator. If you're not sure who your state assemblyman is, if it's Mike Durso or if it's some other legislator, you can get their contact information, their email address, You can write a letter of your own. You can use the sample letter that's provided there as a guide. It articulates the message and the issues. And the more that that happens, the more that our legislators, I remember being up in Albany many years ago and meeting with an aide to a significant member of the legislature at that time. And he said, if on any given issue, if we get 50 letters or phone calls, we listen. That's significant. If somebody, if we're getting, that kind of response from people, we take it seriously. If we get 100 letters, if we get 500 letters, we really wake up and take it seriously. And so we can make a difference. And I think that that's what we have to urge everyone to do, everyone we know, family, friends, neighbors, because this is a crisis like we've never seen before. And what's at stake are real lives. And we have to let our elected officials know that and know that we expect them to do something about it. It's not good enough to issue press releases. If I have to see the commissioner of OASAS giving a public service announcement one more time, I'm going to throw up. Because you're talking about if people need help, call. And my response is, call who when you're cutting us? Who's going to answer the phone? Who's going to respond and provide the help that people so desperately need? So this can't be governance by press release. This has to be standing up, taking bold action, maybe making tough decisions that people might not like to hear. But you have to do it anyway. Because this isn't about the next election. This is about your neighbors' lives. This is about your family's lives. So wake up and do what needs to be done. And that's the message that we have to keep hammering away at to the legislature, who can make a difference here. They can make a huge difference. This is a once in a generation opportunity. People know that there has to be a significant response to this, and they're willing to pay the price. They're willing to pay the price because they know that the alternative is to lose lives, and we don't have to let that happen.
So Joe, just to build on something
Thank
you
you, Joe.
said.
Go ahead, Anthony. Was it Anthony or Jeff? I'm sorry.
Anthony, go first. That's fine.
Thanks. So yeah, I just to kind of piggyback on that, and there was something that Arta said that, she took my reactive and proactive, so I'm going to take something she said, which I thought was really good. Which she said, you know what, maybe you don't have addiction in your family, and maybe you're not impacted by mental health, but your property values are going to go down, right? So that brings me to my first point. My first point is that I think it starts with, you have to rally up and increase, when the SEALs go in, right, they do force building, right? So we need to build up the force and the amount of people that find value in having to fight against this. I'm gonna wear my other hat for a second. As the founder of FIST, and Jeff is a big part of that, we were able to rally up a lot of these families that lost children and that were impacted by addiction, that they were livid that nobody was listening. And they were really the champions. We just kind of organized them, right? And they were more than happy to do what needed to be done to get their message across. So I think the first thing is that, there's 17, 18 of us on this here. This is a great panel. This is a great thing. We need to get the information, right, to the masses. So that's the first thing. So we need to force build. The second thing is, right, and making the point of why would they have an interest in this? Why would this have value to them? And bring some of those points home. The second thing is what Joe talked about, the concise message, right? We cannot be going in many different directions, right? We have to have a concise message. When we with FIST in 2014 was probably one of the only times that I've seen that all of these different organizations were facing in the same direction and were saying the same message. That year we got 11 bills passed, right? There was a reason for it. It was all of the families that got on a bus and came up to Albany and were willing to do that. And it was all the agencies that were given the same message. The other thing I'm going to say is the families play a big part in this. The compelling stories that they're able to tell are how their life is being impacted, right? Kind of along the lines of what Sharon said the other day. And then finally, the last thing is educating and speaking to our elected officials, because at the end of the day, that's their lane. It's not our lane, right? They have to figure out how do they get the money shifted? How do they get the money to be able to support the necessary services that we need, right? It is for us to be able to give them the information so that they can make an informed decision and they can battle at the table. But I do think that there's a few steps here. It's not just about, writing a letter. I think it's good, but I really think we need to force build. Like you said, Joe, if you send 50 letters or you send 5,000 letters, there's a difference. And today with social media, it's not that hard, to be able to listen, this past presidential election, we had how many millions of people voted? 75 on one side, 81 on the other side. Why? Because people found value in it. They found importance in making sure that they did something to get whoever it is that they felt needed to be elected to be elected. That's just my 2 cents. That's what I think. Sorry to take your time, Jeff. Go ahead.
No worries, Anthony. You made a good point, and you actually made the point that I was going to make in some regards, and you probably did it better than I was going to do it. But I did want to just comment on the notion of talking heads from executive directors and CEOs. That's helpful, and that does the macro kind of stuff. But mobilizing consumers and giving them a voice has a double benefit to it. The other part of it is that they're traditionally voters, and you're right, Anthony. We went into some of those meetings and there were moms who had lost their children who pulled ashes out in Tupperware containers and put them on legislators' desks and said,
Wow.
Here's what failing an outpatient treatment looks like for my kid. That's the kind of stuff we need. And there are legislators to this day, some of whom are otherwise elsewhere these days, who have said, I will never, out of my entire career, I will never forget that moment. That's the way you make an impression. And I will say one of the things that I feel like is in our direction, given COVID, is that every family has now experienced the anxiety, the uncertainty, the questions about what will happen to me, the questions about whether or not I'll be able to access a vaccine, the struggles of trying to balance your kid's schoolwork with your work. There are families that never had to experience all of that. Now they've got a firsthand glimpse into that, and children who might have been doing really well in school and spouses who might have been really well adjusted suddenly can't sleep, suddenly are developing problems with eating, suddenly are developing mental health disorders. For the first time, the entire world got a glimpse of what it's like to deal with constant anxiety. We should be talking about that more and saying that's what happens during a pandemic. I do want to get to the notion because, and Arda kind of touched on this, and it's one of the things that I said to her when we spoke, is that there's no elected official right now who would say, we just don't have the money for PPE, or we just don't have the money to support vaccines, right? Nobody's going to do that from either side of the aisle. We've got to make it not okay to hide behind the fact that we don't have money to say, well, we have to cut you 20% because we don't know what we're getting in federal aid. And quite frankly, I had elected officials who suggested I call Chuck Schumer. I'm like, I would venture to guess you have a better relationship with him than I do. Why has it become my job to call Chuck Schumer and beg for federal aid? I'm happy to do it, and I did it, but I shouldn't be in that position. I'm too busy trying to maintain services for 30,000 Long Islanders. But I think saying to elected officials, it's your job to find the money, there's a part of that that's really appealing to me. There's another part of me that says that's BS. There's money for the things we want there to be money for here in this state, whether it's a new bridge, whether it's the expansion of gambling opportunities, we somehow find a way to do it. And when we talk about revenues, there's a number of revenue opportunities that are on the table. As someone who is deposed by the opioid manufacturers and distributors for more than 8 hours in a law office in Garden City, I want to see them pay to clean up the mess that they created in New York State and across Nassau and Suffolk counties. That money is going to come into New York State. Those dollars should not be sucked into the general fund and used to build another bridge. Those dollars should go to remediating the harm that those distributors and manufacturers caused. And every penny ought to be going to services that are going to support families, including those where families are now supporting grandkids because the parents have died of opioid overdoses. This is a long tail problem that's going to last us for another generation. As the governor talks about expanding sports betting, Nobody stepped up in opposition to it, and I don't know that anybody should. But we haven't increased problem gambling services in the state in more than 15 years. In fact, we've cut them. Controller DiNapoli has asked on 2 separate occasions for there to be a complete study of problem gambling statewide. Meanwhile, we added Jake's 58 in Medford. We added 3 upstate casinos, and now we're going to put a casino in everybody's pocket without expanding the services to address the downside and deal with the 1% to 2% who are going to develop a problem. State anticipates $350 million in the first year of operation. How much of that is going to be spent on addiction and mental health services for people that go off the rails with too much of a good thing?
So can I just build on that, Jeff? Because this is another thing that's critical.
Yeah.
Just letting them know that we know, and I don't want to talk with the, I know Assemblyman Durso's on here, which I, thank you for being here. But you've got to admit, like, when you have an educated consumer, I'm old enough to remember that from Sims, remember that? An educated consumer is our best customer. When you have an educated consumer, it actually, on the one hand, it's like, oh no, they know what's going on. But the good public officials like educated people. So what you just said, Jeff, to break it down and to educate people about when there's increased sports betting. Remember when the lottery was a questionable thing in the 70s, 80s, that all this money was coming in and it was all supposed to go for education, and very little of it did for a while. And suddenly people started asking about that. I mean, this was like mid to late 80s. So now with increased sports betting, the revenue's coming in. What proportion of that money is going to go to help with the addiction that's going to happen when people have it on their phones? We're making it easier and easier to create addiction of one kind or another. So let's not put that into the general operating fund, which oftentimes is what happens in any government. And let's put it towards the services. Now, I go back to saying prevention is better, than having to deal with it afterwards. But I think that's the part where we communicate clearly. And what you just described could be, written out or sent out in 4 or 5 bullet points so that someone goes in well-informed to make the case. The other thing I want to say are the personal stories, like they will never forget that Tupperware. They will never forget when someone who has experienced this tells their own story. I always say respecting confidentiality because not every client wants to share their story. But Therese had said, at Long Island Crisis Center, one of their most vocal volunteers was someone who called up in the middle of the night and was desperately in need of services. And when they got that services, they said, I'll do whatever I can do to help the next person. We have about 100 something weekly papers on Long Island. There should be something, and I know there have been in a bunch of them over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but there should be something in every single weekly paper because people read their weekly papers more than they do Newsday. A short personal column, an appeal, a photo, a something with a simple ask, a simple call to action for people to just get in touch with their legislator or to share their story or to do whatever. That's what makes an impact, and that's what people will respond to.
Artie, there's another example. Commercialization of marijuana has come up a couple of times on here, and we could probably do an entire seminar on that. What I would say is, when I go to the state and they say, look, ask Chuck Schumer, maybe we'll get a federal bailout package. My prime question is, you have $30 million that you are tagging to stand up the Office of Cannabis Management. You have $30 million for that, but you won't spend $2 million to get out ahead of this and do a proactive prevention campaign focused on marijuana use among kids, pregnant women, and folks with mental illness who are using at a higher rate simply because we're debating whether or not the drug should be legal. And so you have young people say, well, it's basically legal. It's not a big thing. We wouldn't be making it legal if it was all that bad. So we already see an upswing in use. We're already dealing with the consequences. Yet for 2 years, I've asked the state to launch a prevention campaign to get ahead of this. We just don't have the money. Well, then how do you have the $30 million to set up a new state office and hire more than 100 staff to run a program that hasn't even hit the ground yet and that ultimately is going to cost us more money in the long run? Those are the kind of the conversations we need to have. So I think it's a 1-2 punch. It's here's the community need as told by consumers who are your constituents. Here's what we know about the budget, and here's the potential solution to all of this.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Renee,
So the only thing I would add to that,
Joe
I
wants to
would
jump
think that it's important as the emphasis has been on get that federal aid. We need that federal aid. If we get that federal aid, we won't have to cut 20%, right? We heard that. The reality is that that federal aid, which absolutely should come to New York State, and we've all advocated for that and will continue to, but the reality is that federal aid is one-time money. This is not a one-time problem. This is a problem that is going to be with us for a generation. Because again, we're facing an incredible challenge of a triple pandemic. And we have to remember that. And so again, there have to be bold steps to make tough decisions and find the revenue, and don't accept the excuse that we don't know where we're going to get the money from. The money is there. It'll be found if there's a will to address these problems. If there's no will to address it, well, then there's no money. And that's what it comes down to. So I would ask that we make sure we hammer away at the message, that we contact those legislators. Every single one of them needs to hear from every single person that we can get them to hear from, the seriousness of this and the urgency of it. This is the urgency of the moment, and we can't let this moment go by without responding proactively, or else shame on all of us.
It's definitely not a short-term problem. And by the way, the stimulus thing raises the ugly question of supplanting. Those of you who've been in the nonprofit community, it's a word I never really quite got, but the idea was the feds say, usually if I give you money, you can't use it to fix a hole in your budget. That's called supplanting. That's exactly what we're doing here. So even the restoration of the 20% cuts may be very temporary. It may not be the solution. So yeah, this is no time to celebrate that it was put back. They're relying on money that they might not be able to use for the very problem that you've got, which is the restoring of your budget, let alone expanding it. And we've seen the gambling thing is a really good point, because at our task force meetings, we brought up the question of gambling. And I was surprised to see how many of our counseling centers and treatment centers have young people who are way in debt on online gambling while they're home getting stoned. So it's a really serious problem. And the whole idea of let me commercialize drugs and I will provide you with some of the money to make back the damage that it will cause is a really strange argument. We've seen also a big kick up in suicides. You mentioned that all of us get calls all the time from friends who are in trouble because we're known in the field. This week alone, I had 2 situations where young girls slit their wrists because mom took away the cell phone. Those girls were 11 years old each. Mom took away the cell phone because there was child pornography on the phones. The kids met these predators online in the games that they like to play at home. The guys got really good at this. You know, anything you do on a regular basis, you're going to get good at. And they got really good at winning over little girls in there. And that was just right here on Long Island. And then this morning we see that the post office points out that the population of people has grown dramatically here, the addresses on Long Island. So the need is not only great, but the population is growing here on Long Island. As people have been moving out of the city and onto Long Island with their families in need of more and more services. So it's no time to relax. And thank you, Jeffrey. And also Assemblyman Mike Durst, I'm so glad that you're here to catch up on the information. Okay, good. That's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, as I was listening to all of you, I was thinking about the sheer power of social media. And I was imagining a thread that ran through Renee, through Joe, through Jeff, through Anthony, through all of us, that if there was a clear message, a clear, solid, dramatic message that could be created and sent out through social media so that people could stop and say, wait a minute, I need to pay attention. I think that moment is really due now. It really is due now. And so that's just an observation, you know, that I have. And because that's where we're spending all our time, right? In the world of social media. And, you know, working together. Go ahead, Arda. I
was going to say, so I have very strong views on social media, and people laugh Because given what I do and who I do it for, I've made a conscious decision not to be on social media personally.
Yeah.
But when I'm involved in a serious crisis, and I do a lot of crisis management, I have people who curate social media for me. I mean, I will pay someone to do it just because I know what a black hole it is. I also know what a fairly capable person I am. And the fact that I know I would get sucked into it in a dangerous way says something. Now do that with the 11-year-olds, you know, the 15-year-olds, the 18-year-olds. So I think there's a purpose for it. I think keeping in touch with family, with friends and all of that is fine. But most corporations barely respond to about 2 to 3% of what's on social media. Because one of the points I make, and I do strategic communications involving social media, like I know it, I just consciously don't do it, is fight your fight. Don't get sucked into someone else's fight because you are never going to win. And that gets really dangerous. But yes, if there's a way to have a powerful hashtag, a powerful message, a couple of tiles that really encapsulate all this that a lot of people can use, share, post, then yes, that would be a really good tool. It's one
Yeah.
tool. Totally changing subjects. I wanted to say the words enter business. Where is the LIA? And I'm sure they're doing something, right? Where are the civic organizations? And there are several that are doing something. But one of the points I made when I started working on this most recent issue, but obviously I've done public-private for a long time, is Long Island civic associations, business organizations should care as much about this issue and these issues as the social services sector does. Because there is a business imperative to this entire crisis. And that's got to be, again, dots connected. They have to understand that it matters. And it's the same thing, like Anthony, like the thing with the, you know, property values, fine, but it goes even deeper than that. Like downtowns are impacted by this. Streets are impacted, garbage cans are impacted. And we know how communities rise up when they suddenly sense an enemy in their midst for something else. Why can't they do it for this issue? So, you know, I do think anyone who has relationships with business people, and we're actually fortunate, a number of nonprofits on Long Island in this sector have, you know, sit on a board of a civic organization or have a family member or close friend. So I think bringing them into it is a here and now type of thing, not waiting.
I think that's a good point. You know, I had a number of conversations with Kevin Law, not that it matters now, regarding LIA, and recently had a very spirited conversation with Eric Alexander about the impact of untreated addiction on the community and mental health issues and how that interfaces with businesses and petty crime and those kinds of things. And it was actually a pretty fruitful discussion. I think, you know, and I'll just speak for me, you know, I think our organizations are struggling. You know, there's a social welfare book years ago called Regulating the Poor, and it was about how public benefit levels are kept at a certain level just so that people are fighting to survive and actually can't go out and vote and those kinds of things. And the same thing happens to not-for-profits. We're cash starved. We're running large organizations. I have 340 staff. 79.5% of whom are female and have their own set of needs. And in many regards, the lives of our staff are reflective of the communities we serve, as it should be. But we're spending our lives running programs, and it's almost like we're spinning a million plates, especially during COVID. And then I try to squeeze into my day, go have lunch with Eric Alexander, or go talk to Kevin Law. It's a lot of things to kind of keep spinning. And I think, you know, the more we can begin to share that work, and that was the beauty that Anthony talked about with FIST, and that every organization came to the table and said, all right, so I really rock at this, so I'm going to take this piece, or I'm really good at this, so I'm going to do that piece. And I think that's one of the things that needs to happen in our sector, perhaps in a more focused kind of way. And I think, you know, we all have our own set of relationships, and we do tend to gravitate together when the chips are down. But I think it's having a longer range strategic vision to sustain the sector and to sustain these services is absolutely critical. And I think this is and Joe mentioned this, I think this is the inflection point where it's do or die. We kind of got to do it. The reality is that there are a number of not-for-profit organizations that will not make it through the next 8 or 9 months. They're just not going to survive. And there's a part of that that's probably healthy attrition, and that's the way of the world, and it happens in business and it happens in a lot of places. But many of those smaller organizations serve really important functions in their own communities. It'd be a shame to see that lost. And it would be a shame if we didn't get together and plan out what the needs are versus letting it happen in that incremental, haphazard, only the strong survive kind of way. And so I agree with everyone who has spoken. Really, now is the time for us to have these longer range conversations about how do we sustain these services at a time when we know we're going to need them more than ever before.
Thanks, Jeff. Jeff Stone, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'll follow Jeff. Jeff too, light Jeff. You know, it's amazing to me. I can identify with everybody that shared their expertise tonight. A call to action. How do you get people involved? You know, it's Kathy and I found a great way, and that's through a service organization called Kiwanis. And we've been able to talk to different groups within Kiwanis, whether it's the Circle K kids at the Long Island universities, the high school key clubbers, myself going to a Circle K conference up in Lake George, or Kiwanis convention in Binghamton or Niagara, and Syracuse, Albany. It's spreading that message, not just locally, but statewide and international wide, because now we have an international president-elect of Kiwanis right here in East Meadow. All right, he knows what we're doing here. And I invite all the dignitaries, the Kiwanis, to participate, to come on board, as I did with our elected representatives. One got back saying they were busy. The others, no show, which is fine. Everybody's busy today. But I respect Assemblyman Mike Durso for being here tonight. Thank you so much. And if you wanted to say something, jump in at any time, please. All right. But a call to action, Anthony. I mean, what makes people so complacent? I was too, until I got sick and tired of seeing all the news about mental illness, addiction, death, suicide on TV, social media, reading in the papers. I decided to do something, but it was only until my friend Kathy said, do something about it if you feel that compelled. And I did. And we had like-minded individuals. We met in Joe Smith's office at Port Counseling with a few other like-minded individuals. We decided to move forward and forming Project Help Long Island. As a matter of fact, it was a local police officer that thought of Project Help. We just
the acronym.
Yeah, we just added Long Island to make it kind of fancy. But the thing is that what gets people to respond? What does it take? Is it constant promotion, marketing of our efforts, your efforts? Is it taking ads out in the paper? We've taken ads out in the paper. All right, the local papers are talking about what we're doing here, getting interviewed by local entities, whether it's a radio station locally or some other medium, But again, is too much complacency. If there isn't enough value seen by the person, what compels them to get involved? Sometimes it's when something comes so close to them, it hurts them. The pain level. What's the pain point? So that's when people start to get involved, when it involves them on a personal matter. But it can be something as small where they can just see something going on with their neighbor and telling them. I mean, Anthony Rizzuto, I met you at one of our Kiwanis Club meetings. I invited Stephen Chasman of LICAD to come and speak. And before you know it, I'm meeting everybody involved in mental health and substance use addictions. And it's been amazing for me. I'm going to keep it going for sure. I'm not shy of hitting up on anybody, and letting them know that this is deadly serious. I mean, the amount of people that I see, I spoke last night before a group about Project Help, because I'm not an expert in anything else. I'm not a clinician doctor, but I spoke from the heart about Project Help. And one gentleman told me he's got 20 years of sobriety after the meeting. Another gentleman, I talked to him and his wife. He lost his son recently to a suicide, and I gave him a name and a number to call, and this happens no matter where I go, I've had a contractor at my house. The subcontractor has a brother who drinks much too much. He's an alcoholic, all right, suffering alcoholic. This happens all the time. You bring it up, and I guarantee you, there's somebody within shouting distance. Somebody's been affected by this. All right. I've had a number of cases like that, and it's just on and on and on. So what compels people to do something, to be non-complacent? It's getting outside of your comfort zone and doing something. Like it could start out small as a phone call, or to join a group or a service organization. Keep pumping out there. Reach out into what we did to hyper-local groups, Kathy, seniors, interfaith clergy, Long Island. We reached into people who have lost a loved one, people with personal experiences. That's what makes sometimes an activist, as in Sharon Richmond or Michael Gray. The list goes on. How are you going to reach that person to do more than just say, okay, that's not me, I'm not involved, I don't have a problem, forget about it. But it's also a personal responsibility from a family point of view. All right. So we have to, I remember smoking, people wanted to see, the government wanted to see us stop smoking, whatever. So they had pictures of lungs that were all darkened. I'm not saying you could do that with this, but when Jeff said, well, the lady put her son's ashes on the table, I mean, that's powerful. You can't forget.
Profound.
I mean, so the thing is that sometimes you have to shock the body for it to respond. All right. But Assemblyman Durso, if you have something to say, and I just want to say one last thing. And Jeff, this was on the last statement on your presentation to the joint legislative budget hearing on mental hygiene. Virtually everyone involved in state's response to COVID and every county executive has noted the significant mental health consequences associated with the pandemic. Everybody knows about it. The 2021-22 state budget is an opportunity to better link the rhetoric, connect with the community needs, the dollars and the services available to those who are struggling. And we've got to get the rhetoric and the action combined. And that's how we have to figure out how to do it. So folks, like, you're here now, you're doing what you can, your boots on the ground, we're doing what we can. And, we'll do it through Kiwanis, we'll do it through another organization, what have you. And it starts with one ball and it keeps rolling and picks up others along the way. Maybe that's the way it's supposed to work. Anyway, that's my spiel for tonight. Assemblyman?
Sure. I mean, obviously everybody's is so much more well-versed obviously in this than me, and listening to everybody speak is amazing. At the same time, as I try and look at everything as a parent. I mean, before I'm a legislator, I'm a parent. I have 2 young girls. I have a family. So I try and look at everything from the father aspect, because that's my job. So it troubles me, obviously, when these things come down, these cuts, the proposed cuts, and Mr. Smith was saying maybe they're not going to happen now. But as you were saying before, too, it's the kicking the can down the road syndrome, because what happens a year from now or 2 years from now when that funding isn't there? This is obviously an issue. We all know that, and especially in light of the pandemic, it's brought those things to light where everybody is stuck at home, or they feel that they've been held back from people and they don't have the socialization with their friends. I see it again with my own children. Thankfully, they've been okay and they haven't had those types of real severe issues. But to be personal with you, and I'll do that because I'm a pretty open and honest person. When you want to talk about it, when it affects you, Mr. Stone, I know you said it, when it affects you personally, you take it more serious. I have friends that, I mean, I can think of one specifically, I obviously won't use his name, but he's struggled with alcoholism since we were 18 years old. This was the by far worst thing that could happen to him because he's in a job where he can work from home, and which for him is fantastic. But to tell you the truth, he sat in front of his computer all day and began to start, slowly but surely, one beer and then one drink, and then and now he's in rehab again. And and it wasn't just with alcohol with him. He had an addiction to painkillers at one point. So again, until it hits you at home, sure, it's where I think the people get, like you were saying before, someone was saying, you have that common cause where everybody gets their backs up in the air and they go, okay, now let's fight it, as opposed to being, as Artie was saying before, proactive instead of reactive, which I have to admit, I say that all the time. So I think someone stole that from me, but but I believe you. And I say you're 100% correct in the fact that, until it affects you at home, until it's at your front doorstep, I don't think people, they almost push it to the side because they don't want to deal with it. Obviously, it's something that we're going to have to deal with for now, and going forward. Again, I take everything, I try and look at it personally. I am someone that was in a job prior, one of my many jobs, to where I've had to give somebody Narcan. So I've seen that personally in front of me. I also seen somebody that I wish we would have got to them sooner with Narcan, because they weren't so lucky as the other person. So again, seeing those things directly in front of you, it definitely opens your eyes to certain things. I believe, Kathy, you were saying it before when talking about people with the pots and pans on their balconies or on their front doorsteps, and saying thank you to all the doctors and the police and the paramedics and the essential workers. We have a tendency in this state and in this country to use the term never forget. And we use it for a lot of things, but we also forget constantly. And it's purposeful too, because I believe that people, if they think about it constantly, they get depressed and they get upset. So they kind of put it to the side. But this is something that until it affects you, you won't forget it. And I know, Mr. Reynolds, we've been on a couple of calls together now, and I am doing the best I can to sit in on every call and speak to every person, because the only way I think as a legislator that you can govern properly is to learn, to hear everybody's side, to hear the needs of everybody, to hear the needs of the people that you are helping. So that way we can go in, make those educated decisions, understand that there's money needed. Everything costs money. So we all know that. But again, to go back to that, Artis said, that proactive as opposed to reactive. If you want to look at it from a money standpoint, it saves money if you're proactive. Like you said, I think someone said it before, was that $1 service is $7 later. If I believe someone has said that. So, I mean, if you want to look at it strictly from a money standpoint, take care of it first before it becomes a problem. Like we said, I sat in that marijuana, the marijuana board that they were talking about the commercialization of marijuana, which that opened my eyes to a lot of things, because that changes things for children and it changes things for people that have those addictions, that then they go in and they see the cigarette sign next to the marijuana sign, next to the Corona sign, and then you sit there and you look at that and you go, wow, we're just promoting everything that really, I hate to say, is bad for you. But getting those things out there, I heard you talking, and I'm sorry, now I'm going to hit on everything because I took a lot of notes, just so everybody knows. But I heard you talking about how do we get the word out there to legislators. As I sat here and listened, I think I counted, I probably got 300 emails, but I counted 74 of them about a retirement bill that just came out. So when I go through my emails, there's going to be 74 specifically just about one specific retirement email or bill, excuse me. So I think using the emails, using social media to, like you said, to fight that specific fight is a good thing. I also think, and again, looking at it from the non-legislative side, as a parent, because I am new to the legislature, so I can still look at it that way. When people think of mental health, I think people look at it as a certain thing. They go, oh, that's someone that, and I hate to use this word, or someone that's just that's going nuts at the time. They don't look at mental health is everything that you all were speaking about, everything from drug addiction to the socialization, the affecting everywhere from kids, my youngest daughter's age, which is in kindergarten, up to our seniors, speaking about our veterans, speaking about our police, speaking about our doctors and nurses that are dealing with us on the front lines. I've never seen a year where I heard so much about police suicide. Which is mind blowing to me. And again, and why is that? Is it the pandemic? Is it all the anti-police legislation that went through last year and what they had to go through? And then the other side of it, to where people that were home and were scared, and there's all this. Social media is a great tool, but it's a horror show at the same time. Arda was saying it before. I specifically wrote it down. I did not have any type of social media I'm 41 years old. I've never had social media until I ran for office, because again, you have to get your name out there. I didn't like social media. I still don't like it. I keep my children off of it, because again, it is that rabbit hole that you can go down, and it's not even what you find, it's who finds you when you're in that rabbit hole, especially for children. I think is a huge problem. I mean, it's again, so having that funding, having the people like yourselves, the professionals that are really out there, really dealing with it and knowing what's going on is obviously huge. Me and anybody else in the legislature should be listening to all of you and getting those firsthand accounts and understanding what it is you need and why you need it. I think that's what I'll be doing. I'll be speaking to people in the legislature, passing along the information, but I also like to learn, because like I said, to me, it makes it an informed decision. That way you have that always in the back of your mind or the front of your mind of what this, if you move money to here in the budget, where's it going to affect this? And there's got to be a happy medium. And again, as a parent, I'm always worried about my kids, your kids, the children. And then these budget cuts would affect them greatly. So we always have to worry about them, obviously, because that old saying, the children are our future, but it's the truth. And again, believe me, I'm with you 100%. The budget cuts that were proposed or may still be are not good. They're not good, and they're across the board for a lot of places. But again, it's the kicking the can down the road. So we got to figure out now, how do we keep that money in place for the future? Talking about the opioid settlement, that money should not go into the general fund. I 100% agree with you, Mr. Reynolds. That's, to me, that's actually embarrassing that's even a thought. I already signed on to letters and legislation saying that should be locked up and specifically for that only. Again, let's use the money the correct way here in the legislature. Maybe we could start that new, as I'm a new elected official. That would be nice to see. But again, having this open relationship, me learning from all of you and you reaching out to me when you need something and me doing the same so I can get information, I think will be huge. And I will pass along the information to anybody else I come in contact with.
Great. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Assemblyman.
Yeah, before we wrap up, does anybody have a burning desire to add to the conversation tonight? Something maybe we overlooked or something you wanted to put out there? Well, okay. I think we covered a lot of territory here tonight, and
Yes.
Kathy and I definitely want to thank each and every one of you who had spoken tonight,
Thank
took the time out of your busy schedules to come on. And Kathy and I are very good at marketing on our business models, and we're going to get this word out there one way or the other, and we're going to come up with inventive and creative ways. If something is based on attraction, people will be attracted to it. If it's based on something that they see value in, they'll come to you. You build it, they'll come. All right. So I'm a firm believer. We just have to find out what's going to connect them and reach out that way. But we'll find the way.